All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. It sounds like you guys had a little bit of an opportunity to chat while I was getting situated. So that's always a blessing, too. I'm not going to waste any of your time because we have a guest here, which is Joelle, and she's going to give us an introduction in just a moment. So we just want to take the time to thank Joelle for being here with us tonight. We're always blessed by having, visitors from World Church, from international headquarters. It's nice to be able to spend some time just being together and kind of expanding our minds and hearing about what's new and exciting. So, great big welcome to Joelle, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's really exciting when, I get on some of these things and I am coming to areas that I've been to before, but maybe haven't been to for a while, and I get to see familiar names and faces. So thanks for the invitation and thank you for being here tonight. As Linda said, I can give a bit of an introduction. So I currently work as the director of Temple Ministries and live in Blue Springs, Missouri. I also serve as a president of 70, and I, along with Karen Peter, are the presidents of 70 for Field 5, which is all of the United States. So that includes all of you. I believe next month, Karen will be joining you all to talk more about hospitality, but maybe a little bit of a different direction from what we'll talk about tonight. So if you don't yet know Karen, you will get to meet her in just a few weeks. So this evening, Linda, did you make me a co-host, or is that possible? This evening, we're going to be talking about hospitality as a political act. And oh, there we go. Sorry, I'm going to get my screen shared so that I can focus on speaking. Okay. All right. So I want us to begin tonight just with taking some time to kind of center ourselves. Anytime that the word politics is used, it can bring up certain feelings that we, carry in our minds, and it can also bring up feelings that we carry in our bodies. Sometimes, when we talk about political things, we might get tense or we might start to feel a little bit restless or anxious. And so I just want us to take a moment to quiet our minds, to quiet our bodies, and just to set an intention for this evening. So if you want, you can close your eyes, but that's totally up to you. But just set an intention for this evening of remaining open to the hospitality of the Spirit as we talk about a topic that can sometimes be a little bit difficult. Thank you for taking that time with me. So I want to begin by just kind of giving an overview for where we are going to go this evening. We're going to start, as we just did, with setting our intention, and then we'll move into talking about politics and hospitality before we go to why disciples should be political and what are Jesus's politics. And then we'll look at how Jesus engaged politically and talk more about living hospitably in politics. And then, with the time that is remaining, we'll see how much that is. We will engage in an enduring principles meditation. Linda has put this on the website, but we'll also share the link to it probably when we get to that point, and we'll also be able to share an upload of the file. So you'll have multiple ways to access it when we get there. So let's begin. Before we can get into the nitty gritty of politics and hospitality, we have to talk about how we in Community of Christ disagree. I always like to tell people I used to be a Latter-day Seeker minister, which means that I worked with people who came from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And even if they, didn't necessarily grow up in that church, or, they didn't have family that came before them, that tradition is one that historically followed, right? They were the ones that went with Brigham out to Utah. Our faith tradition, on the other hand, put our foot down and we said, nope, we're staying here in Illinois, and we refused to go. So we were really born as a tradition of dissenters. And that's a wonderful thing. That's part of the beauty of our diversity, that we're willing to speak with each other and not always agree, bring different perspectives and different ideas. But that also can create its own challenges. And so in Community of Christ, we've had to be really intentional about the ways that we engage in disagreements. So we have a couple of tools that can help us do this. The first tool is faithful disagreement. If you have your camera on, and if you don't, that's okay. But if you have your camera on, will you raise your hand if this is a familiar term to you? If this is something that you've heard of before? Okay. Quite a few have. I see quite a few hands raised. So I think a lot of us might have heard this term, but when I see it lived out in the church, I'm not sure that all of us, really know what it means to live in faithful disagreement. And I think in a lot of ways, before I started kind of trying to articulate it, I wouldn't have known what it means to live in faithful disagreement. And so it's important when we talk about this tool to make sure that we're engaging in it in the right way. So when we faithfully disagree, it doesn't mean that if we don't agree with whatever is being presented or whatever policy somebody is putting before the conference floor, that we just sit there and stew and, kind of tune everything out and just already know how we're going to come down on the issue. It also doesn't mean that if we do agree with whatever is being discussed or whatever policy is being presented on the conference floor, that we sit up on our high horse, just so proud of ourselves for being part of the whole. So that's not what we mean when we say faithful disagreement. What it does mean is that regardless of your stance on any given issue, you have a place in this faith community. You agreeing or disagreeing with a particular stance taken by Community of Christ does not affect your worth or make you less wanted in this community. Your views, one way or the other, are not a test of faith. You are respected as a human being first, regardless of your views on a topic. So
There.
that inherent worth is part of it. But it also means that we are navigating issues in community with an awareness of and an openness to the Spirit and the way that it will form and guide us. So, as we consider difficult topics in community, we have to remain open to the perspective of others and listen to them respectfully and deeply. As disciples of Jesus, we have to stop focusing on being right and start focusing on being in right relationship with God, with ourselves, with each other, and with all of creation. So, one tool that we have in our tool belt for disagreeing is faithful disagreement. And when we engage in this, we are open to having our minds changed. The second tool that I want to talk about is prophetic imagination. The idea of prophetic imagination, which I believe, I don't know this for sure, so don't quote me on this. I bet Linda would know it based on her background. I believe that it was something that was kind of presented by Walter Brueggemann. That's where I first encountered it. And he is a wonderful theologian. But in Community of Christ, we have really attached ourselves to this concept of prophetic imagination because we are a prophetic people. So, this idea of prophetic imagination is that beyond anything that we can imagine, God can imagine bigger. God can imagine more peaceful, more possible than we could ever comprehend. Prophetic imagination is a choice we make to engage with God's imagination when our limited scope prevents us from seeing possibilities or paths forward. So if something is said this evening that goes against your typical political beliefs or the way you think we should approach politics in church, I would invite you to put your disbelief aside during this session and instead ask yourself, but what if it's true? What are the implications of my life of discipleship if I did agree with this statement or this stance? We as a prophetic people are all invited to join God in God's prophetic imaginings in hopes that we can work together to bring about God's preferred future. So regardless on where you stand on any of the things that we talk about tonight, God's prophetic imagination can help us step outside of politically fraught views of issues we are facing. And it can also help us come up with creative solutions to these issues that uphold the worth and dignity of all people and honor the sacredness of creation. So, the third and final tool that I want to talk about is one that we don't necessarily explicitly talk about in Community of Christ. In fact, I heard it on the radio years ago, a couple years ago, and it was in the middle of a story, and I don't even remember the topic of the story, except that it had to do with relationships. And I think that this is something that we in Community of Christ can really kind of take and make our own because of how much we care about one another and being in good relationship with each other. So the whole premise of this news story was that there are certain people who are able to be more successful in their relationships in terms of them lasting longer or being able to overcome certain obstacles or issues. And all of these people that were, said to be doing better in relationships, whether that be a romantic partner or a friendship or a colleague, it didn't matter. The one thing that they were able to do was that when they reached a point in a conversation when most people would just throw up their hands and walk away, they were willing to do a very important thing. They were willing to ask just one more question. And so tonight, I would invite you, if you get to feeling frustrated or if you get to wanting to just exit the Zoom room, to pause and turn to wonder and think, is there just one more question that I could ask in this situation? So those are our tools that are going to kind of help guide us tonight. And I want to put everybody's mind at ease. We aren't going to be talking about any specific political issues tonight. If you want to have those conversations, I am very happy to have them with you. I think it's important that we as people of faith engage in those conversations. So reach out to me. But tonight, it's not the topic of our conversation. So if you were starting to feel a little stressed about things getting contentious, don't worry. That's not where it's headed. But I still think it's important that we remember these tools because if we are going to approach our politics as an act of hospitality, we have to know how to disagree. So let's go ahead and look more specifically at politics and hospitality. It's been said that a vote is a kind of prayer about the world that we want to live in. If we hope to live in a world with more hospitality, then we have to vote and participate civically as part of our discipleship. The politics of our communities, our nation, and the world directly shape the systems that structure our daily lives. Therefore, they directly determine how and where and when a person is welcome. I'm going to try really hard tonight to not just speak in abstractions. I want us to recognize the concrete ways in our daily lives that this stuff impacts us. So I want to take just a minute, and I'm hoping that some of you will be willing to share. I want to take just a minute for us to brainstorm some of the ways throughout history that specific policies have limited hospitality. So whatever your example is, I want you to try and make it one that impacts you in some way. So I'll give one so that you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Prior to 1920, as a woman in this country, I was not allowed to vote. So if that policy were still in place today, that would impact the hospitality given towards me in terms of my ability to participate civically. So take just a minute. We'll leave a little bit of silent space, and I want you to think through some policies that would directly impact the hospitality you or someone in your family might experience. So take just a minute to think, and I'll ask for volunteers in a moment. All right. Is there anybody that has thought of a policy that would impact the hospitality shown to them? Yes, I see Lori. Hi, Lori. I do. Oh, there you
Hi,
go.
sorry, it took me a while to unmute. Hi, Joelle. I
Hi.
was thinking of my son Christopher and the problems he had getting work, and without work, he couldn't support his family, um, because he has a felony.
Mm,
And felonies in this country are not rated. So you could be an axe murderer, or you can simply be a person that as a teenager drove his motorcycle without a helmet and had a friend on the back without a helmet, and therefore was pulled over for endangering the life of another human being, which is a felony.
mhm. Yeah.
So he would go to apply for jobs, and the boss would like him, but when they sent it up the corporate ladder, they said, nope, got a felony.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Lori. That's a really good example. A lot of laws around criminal justice and um, the reforms around those do exclude people and prevent hospitality. Thanks for your willingness to share.
No worries.
Others. Anybody else? I can share another example. Nope. Oh, yes. Okay. Zilphia. Yes.
Separate but equal.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. When we said, oh, the schools it'll be the same. It's fine. Separating people out by the color of their skin. That was definitely against hospitality. Thank you, Zilphia. Waterford, Michigan. Waterford, I don't think you're unmuted. I see somebody with a microphone, but I don't think it's unmuted. There we go.
Oh, okay, let me try it again. This is Pam Hernandez. I'm concerned about the children that are developmentally and physically disabled being discriminated against and not being included in a lot of the activities, including scouting and and the like.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. So that one's a really great example because prior to ADA, there was even less hospitality to a lot of folks in that group. And even with progress, um, people that struggle with a disability are a lot of times excluded. All right, if there's just one more example, we'll take it. If not, that's okay. Yes, Bill.
It's in the same vein of the criminal justice, but there are
Mhm.
people who have had um, health care workers who have had charges brought against them for, say, domestic violence or something related to that. Then are excluded from working in any way within the medical field, if it was pharmacy tech or
Mm.
to whatever degree, but they're excluded.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Bill. That's another excellent example. So I want to just again reiterate my gratitude for those of you who shared, because you're talking about like things that are personal to you and the ways that laws or expectations or systems directly impact you because of those characteristics. Sometimes it's difficult for us to recognize the ways the policies and practices of our governing bodies directly impact our daily lives. In fact, in political advocacy work, which is something that I was involved in as a graduate social work student, one of the first things that is taught is this idea of consciousness raising. So, consciousness raising helps people begin to recognize the personal, the things that happen in an individual's life as political. So, the phrase that you would hear is the personal as political. What I mean by this is that we help people understand how the struggles of their daily lives are likely connected to bigger picture policies. Consciousness raising shows that individual issues are not just isolated personal problems, but reflect broader systems of inequality and oppression. So, for example, a person struggling with mental health issues like depression or anxiety might feel isolated, believing that their condition is a personal failure or weakness. However, access to mental health care is often determined by socioeconomic status, health insurance coverage, and government funding for healthcare services in individual states. The stigma around mental health is shaped by societal views, and political decisions influence the availability of mental health resources. So, yes, a person might be experiencing anxiety and depression on a personal level, but there are probably some political causes behind the scenes. Another example is a family struggling to afford groceries may see their situation as a personal financial issue. However, food insecurity is often a result of larger political issues such as income inequality, welfare policies, minimum wage laws, and access to affordable housing. The distribution of resources and access to nutritious food is shaped by government policies and economic systems, making food insecurity a political issue as much as a personal one. So these are just two examples of some personal issues that people might face that really have some bigger political causes or at least societal causes behind them. Consciousness raising helps us make those connections, person to person, that help us realize that in my welfare resides your welfare, and in your welfare resides my welfare. And these societies, these systems, these structures that we live in directly impact the individual lives that we lead. And so if we want people to, experience the fullness of their worth, if we want people to know that all are called and that we celebrate the diversity that they represent, we really do have to start looking at the systems and structures that govern our communities. In short, if we truly believe that statement I just said, if we truly believe that in their welfare resides our welfare, then we have to recognize the direct way politics and social structures impact people's individual welfare. And then we have to actively participate in restructuring systems that are not currently hospitable. Politics relate directly to creating hospitality because we can leverage political action and engagement to create welcome where it doesn't currently exist. So let's move on to why it is that disciples should be political. There are many people who say that the things that should never meet are your religion and your politics. The idea that we shouldn't talk about our politics in church is pretty prevalent. And a lot of times that has to do with keeping the peace. And we'll get more into this in just a minute. Since we've established the ways politics and hospitality are linked, the next thing we must explore is the reason why we as disciples should be politically engaged. In his book, Faith Seeking Understanding, Daniel Migliore examines the mission of the Big C Church and states that the missional activity of the church in the power of the Holy Spirit will be marked by a recognition, a welcome, and support of the presence of the Spirit in all fields of human endeavor, in the sciences as well as the arts, in politics as well as religion, where life and peace are enhanced and death and destruction are combated. What Migliore is saying here is that if we are truly responding to Christ's mission, we won't compartmentalize our lives, making a box for faith and then one over here for politics. Instead, we will allow our beliefs to infuse and inspire our political engagement. Disciples are called to be about the work of bringing about God's preferred future in the world. In a book that I would encourage you all to read, and I'll tell you the title in a moment, Dan Craybill calls this preferred future God's upside down kingdom, because it takes much of our current social, economic, and political structures and flips them on their heads. The book is called The Upside Down Kingdom, and it's excellent. It's a book that I believe has shaped the course of my life, the direction that my life is headed. When we find ourselves trying to avoid allowing our politics and beliefs to interact, we are likely doing so for two reasons. So the first I already mentioned. The first is because we are trying to keep the peace. However, the peace that we are trying to keep is a false peace, similar to what the Romans in the Roman times would have called Pax Romana in Jesus's time. So the Roman Empire would say, of course, you should let us be in charge. We bring you peace. But in reality, the peace that they brought was based on violence and fear and suppression and subjugation. So it wasn't a true peace. It wasn't the peace that we in Community of Christ are trying to pursue. So while we might avoid talking about politics in our religious spaces, the peace that we're trying to keep when we do that isn't really the true and authentic and deep shalom that God calls us to. The second reason might be that you're trying to avoid the cognitive dissonance between our professed beliefs and the political ideas we support or promote. So what I mean by this is that, we have these beautiful enduring principles, one of my favorite things about Community of Christ. And the things that we say we believe when we say we agree with the enduring principles sometimes come in direct conflict with the political policies or ideologies or parties that we then go and support with our vote and perhaps with our financial contributions or our involvement by being present and being at events. So this idea that the beliefs we profess in our discipleship might contradict the politics that we are acting out in our daily lives is a hard one. It creates cognitive dissonance for us. And so that's another reason we might try to keep those two things separately. But ultimately, if we are to have any integrity at all, we as disciples have to live the beliefs we profess in our sacred spaces out in our daily lives, and by extension, in political spaces. So we have to talk for just a minute about what Jesus's politics would have been. So because we as disciples are followers of Jesus, it's important for us to kind of wrestle with this question. Let me begin by saying that Jesus is inherently political. The very message he comes to bring challenges the status quo and calls for a reordering of the policies and structures that we allow to govern us. So if anyone tells you that Jesus wasn't political, invite them to go and examine the gospel just a little bit closer. Just because Jesus is inherently political, that does not mean that he would align himself with any political party or movement today, though he would likely be more supportive of certain policies than others. So I'm not talking about like the bumper stickers that you see that says Jesus was an insert party here. Jesus probably wouldn't have aligned with any political party because he was aligned with the kingdom of God, with the system that God asks us to pursue. So what then exactly are Jesus's politics? Jesus's politics, when we look at scripture, are always, always, always on behalf of the marginalized or oppressed in any given situation. That is literally never not the case. In every situation, we have to ask ourselves, who has the most to lose and the least protective factors at their disposal? And then we go and stand with them. Jesus's politics were never about forcing others to conform to specific sets of beliefs or practices. He would not condone a theocratic approach that required all people to live under the beliefs of any one group because the Bible said so. In fact, Jesus spent a lot of time directly refuting the claim that something should be a certain way because the Pharisees said so, right? Finally, Jesus's politics were without allegiance to anything but God. He stood in the midst of the radicals and the traditionalists of his day, and he continued to point to God's preferred future without picking sides. And so once we kind of understand at least the basics of what Jesus's politics likely were, we then have to look at how Jesus engaged politically. Because we look at scripture and on the surface, it probably does seem like he was just, speaking out against religious leaders that were kind of unfair to the people that they were speaking to, or it looks like he's offering healing to certain individuals who are struggling with things. But the reality is that Jesus's life and ministry all had political implications. So what does it look like for Jesus to engage politically? Following Jesus's example as disciples also extends to the ways that we engage politically. This means that in every political action we take or choice we make, we have to make sure to uphold the worth and dignity of all creation. So we can't resort to nasty or demeaning back and forth arguments like those that so frequently fill our Facebook feeds. We have to find a third way that is neither fight nor flight, but is creative enough and is about the careful and arduous pursuit of love, big enough to set both the oppressed and the oppressors free. We too must be that creative. We're going to talk more about this organization in a moment, but I want to just briefly share here about a group called the Friends Committee on National Legislation. They're a lobbying organization that helps people learn how to engage with their representatives. Their starting place and the value that they revisit before any political action is that there is something of God in everyone. Obviously, this is true of the people for whom they are advocating, but it's also true for their opposition, those leaders with whom they adamantly disagree. Holding on to this truth is incredibly important as we engage politically. The big tagline that FCNL uses is love thy neighbor, no exceptions. And so when we engage politically, as Jesus would have done, we have to uphold that worth and that dignity of the people, even if they're on the exact opposite side of an issue to where we are. So let's move on to some of these more concrete actions, because I said at the beginning that I really wanted to try to make this concrete and actionable. And up to this point, after listening to me talk for, I don't know, at least 20 minutes straight, you're probably thinking that I failed at making it concrete and not abstract. So I want to take just a moment to talk about the specific things that we can do to practice hospitality as a political act. So we begin at the personal level. If we are practicing hospitality as a political act within ourselves, we must begin by checking in and reflecting about all of the political decisions that we make. In a world increasingly divided by party lines, we must make sure that the only party platform we are promoting is that of the kingdom of God. If we find ourselves defending something simply because our party affiliations say we should, we have to pause and instead examine the issue through the lens of God's reign. We have to ask ourselves, does this protect the marginalized and oppressed as Jesus would have done? We have to ask ourselves, does this challenge us to reflect more deeply, or are we just pointing back to long-held beliefs that are in the Bible or because the Bible says so? The next thing that we do is that we move to the politics that arise in our interactions with one or two other people. So we move from this personal reflection where we, assess our own politics and our own political engagement, and then we move to the relationships that we have, those that we engage in one or two at a time. This is perhaps where our hospitality is most needed in our current context. It's often in the small conversations with those we encounter frequently that the most opportunity for hospitality is evident, both in how we treat them and in how our conversations shape actions. We must begin simply by listening, not with the intent to respond, but instead with the intent to understand. We also have to stay curious, choosing to ask just one more question when we would rather just stop the conversation and walk away. And finally, we must resist the urge to default or hold to the party line, whatever our party affiliation is. Remember, as disciples, we must root ourselves in something much deeper than party politics. I want to add something here that I didn't initially plan to. Again, in a world that is increasingly divided upon party lines, it can be really easy for us to find those who agree with us, whether it be on Facebook or in our one-on-one interactions, and to just kind of connect with them and stay in an echo chamber with them. But if we are to really help move the needle on this political stuff closer to God's preferred future, we have to be willing to engage in conversations with the people that it's hard for us to engage with. Not the ones who agree with everything we say and who nod and smile, but the ones who disagree with us. And we have to approach those conversations with the intent to uphold their worth and dignity. I'm sorry if you can hear my dogs barking. They'll stop soon, I promise. So once we've worked on the relationships just between one or two other people, we look at what it might be like to practice hospitality as a political act in our congregations. Often we shy away from preaching about politics behind the pulpit. And I agree that we need to be really careful about how we do this. But again, Jesus was inherently political. If we can't preach about politics, then we can't preach about the gospel. This does not mean that we stand up and endorse a certain candidate. but it does mean that we bring our shared values and principles to provide insight and guidance on the problems we face in the political sphere. So again, it's not about endorsement. It's not about pushing certain agendas. It is about looking at the issues that our communities are facing and applying our professed beliefs to those situations. I know that there are some folks who have a lot of concerns around this, and I understand why. As long as we refuse to endorse a specific candidate or a specific party from behind the pulpit, we can have these conversations in what I hope are productive ways. Perhaps you're still a bit concerned about bringing politics into your congregation in big ways. There are still things that you can do to help your congregation approach politics with hospitality in mind. So there's a website, and I'm going to paste it in the chat if I can do that while I talk. Let's see. Oh, maybe I cannot. Yes, I can. Here we go. Here we go. So I'm posting the link to a website in the chat, and this website is called All Things Are Spiritual. And you can access many things at this website, but the one specifically that I'm talking about tonight are a collection of spiritual practices intended for both before and after elections. These are in no way partisan, but instead invite all people to approach politics from a place of faith. Although they are specific to elections, they can very easily be used as spiritual practices for political engagement more generally. So if you're worried about, standing behind the pulpit and taking on a big issue that our community is currently facing, there are still things that you can do within your congregation to help us start examining how we live our faith through our politics. And so this website is a good place to start with some spiritual practices that can at least begin the process. So the final level that we need to look at are the specific actions we can take in the formal structures of our local and national governments. The first thing that we should do in this regard is to join with others who are already doing the work. Over the past 8 years, I have encountered so many people of faith who are committed to living out their beliefs through political action. They have a wealth of knowledge from which we can learn. For example, the National Council of Churches sponsors the annual Ecumenical Advocacy Days in Washington, D.C. Here you can meet and network with other people from faith-based organizations and take specific action on issues of justice and peace. Joey Williams, one of the apostles from Field 5, and I will be going to Ecumenical Advocacy Days in April. If this is something that you would be interested in participating in, let me know, and we'll see if we can make it happen because we'd love to have you along. Another organization that isn't partisan that we can join with is the Poor People's Campaign. So you've probably seen a lot of images from the Poor People's Campaign March on this show. So in the summer of 2024, a group of Community of Christ folks from Chesapeake Bay Mission Center attended the Moral March and Assembly hosted by the Poor People's Campaign. The Poor People's Campaign was originally founded by Martin Luther King Jr., and it was kind of revived by Reverend William Barber. So again, here's a person of faith, inspired by another person of faith, who is engaging politically from the very depths of the things that they believe. We brought signs with our enduring principles listed on them, and people shared their stories and called for collective action on behalf of the poor. Not a single person talked about the party that they were affiliated with or the candidate that they wanted us to vote for. They shared their stories as people of faith, and they talked about how their beliefs compelled them to act. The next thing we can do, aside from joining with some of these bigger organizations and people of faith already doing this work, is that we can individually and collectively lobby our elected officials. It's so important that they hear from us, and you don't have to travel to Washington, D.C. to talk to them. Organizations like the Friends Committee on National Legislation have chapters nationwide. In fact, there's an FCLL chapter here in Independence, where I live, that a lot of church members are a part of. They make visits to their representatives on a regular basis. Lobbying a representative can be intimidating, but it is so, so important, especially when you do so as a person of faith. When you can say, I'm representing Community of Christ here, that really encourages your representative to take notice. So if you want more information about how you might do this, I would encourage you to start by visiting the FCNL website, the Friends Committee on National Legislation website. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, you can vote. Not along party lines, but along gospel lines. The next time that an election is happening in your local community, I would invite you to approach that election box with your ballot in hand and on your mind and heart. I hope that you would hold the enduring principles and your belief as a disciple of Jesus Christ, and you would use that to guide the decisions that you make as you're deciding who governs you and what policies shape that governing. So to close our session today, and Linda, I think I told you 45 minutes, which is what we're at right now. So you tell me, do you want me to send this with people, or do you want us to take just a couple of minutes to go through the spiritual practice?
It would be really nice to take a few minutes and do that.
Okay, great. So I want to invite you into a spiritual practice that I call a meditation on the enduring principles. So this document should be available to you, and I can't see the chat, so I can't see if Linda is posting it in the chat or not. I'm going to pull it up so that I can show it to you. Give me just a second to do that. There we go. Okay. Let me get it moved over to my second screen. There we go. So I'd invite you, as part of this meditation, to pick an issue that you are currently struggling with or know is particularly contentious in the communities that you are a part of. So, what are some things happening in the political sphere that are really weighing heavy on your heart or are really causing a lot of division or hurt in your community? Take just a minute to think of what that might be. Once you've identified the issue that you want to focus on, I would then invite you, if you think you already have your mind made up on the issue, to set your certainty aside and approach it with new eyes. So some of you might have this sheet pulled up in front of you, and you might have some paper next to you that you want to write things down on. But I'm going to leave it on the screen so that if you don't have it pulled up, you can still see it. And I want you to just take, let's say, 5 minutes, and I want you to work through the enduring principles listed here. And as you think about the topic that you've chosen through the lens of each of these enduring principles, I want you to ask yourself for each enduring principle, how can I live out this enduring principle in response to the issue? And how does this enduring principle inform my stance on the issue? So those questions, I won't leave them highlighted because it kind of distracts from you actually being able to read it, but I've highlighted them on the screen so you can see where they are to reference them again. So how can I live out this enduring principle in response to my issue that I chose? And how does this enduring principle inform my stance on the issue? If you come to an enduring principle that you don't think relates to the issue that you have chosen, I don't want you to skip it entirely, but you can kind of set it aside for the moment and come back to it, because you might be surprised at the ways you can eventually discover that it connects to the issue. After you've explored the issue through each of your enduring principles, I would then invite you to answer the questions at the bottom of the page, which are, with the guidance of the enduring principles on this issue, the most hospitable choice I can make regarding this issue is, and what action can I take now, tomorrow, or in the next week to advocate for that approach in political life? So again, everything that I just read, those questions are on your screen, and we're just going to take 5 minutes now for you guys to have some independent time to kind of work through this meditation. I know it wasn't nearly enough time. Maybe if we only had one enduring principle instead of nine, that might have been enough. But I want to invite everyone back. We live in a world that it's becoming increasingly difficult to know the ways that we should stand for the beliefs that we profess. It's hard to know what action to take when we see people being excluded, or when we see people being further marginalized or oppressed. And so, kind of to close our meditation on that enduring principle, I want to read with you a quote that gives me hope in times when it can be hard to find. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. So, my friends, I'm so grateful for your willingness to be here tonight to discuss a difficult topic when we raise the issue of politics, and to look at it more closely and to see how it can be an act of hospitality. As you leave this place, my prayer is that we will all go forth, and in the places where welcome does not currently exist, we will do the hard work of creating it. Thank you, everyone.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Joelle. If your camera's on and you can give Joelle a little round of applause and a thank you for her time. I'm so appreciative of you, Joelle. Thank you so much for that information. We will send out the recording later because if you're like me, you're thinking, I want to listen to that
Thank
one more
you.
time. And we'll get that worksheet out to you as well so you can check out the spiritual practice. So thank you again, Joelle, and everyone have a wonderful night.
Thank you,
Thank
Joelle.
you. Thank you all.